When Shawn Michaels said he had enemies, he wasn't working an angle. The Heartbreak Kid had real hatred behind the curtain. 10 men who saw the darker side of his legendary career. These weren't storyline rivalries. These were personal wars that left scars, ended pushes, and nearly destroyed the WWF itself. But how did one of wrestling's greatest performers also become one of its most hated figures? The answer lies in power, politics, and the most dangerous faction in wrestling history. During the mid-1990s, Shawn Michaels wasn't just a champion, he was untouchable. He controlled booking decisions, manipulated management, and destroyed careers without consequence. The reason? A backstage group called The Clique. Michaels, Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Sean Waltman formed an alliance that wielded unchecked power inside the WWF. They used their leverage to push their own careers forward while actively sabotaging anyone outside their circle. Michaels sat at the center of this machine. He had Vince McMahon's ear, complete creative control, and zero accountability. His talent was undeniable. Even his enemies admitted he was the best worker in the business. But that talent became a shield. It protected him from the consequences of his toxicity. While other wrestlers faced punishment for bad behavior, Michaels got rewarded. The company needed him too much to discipline him. This created a locker room atmosphere of fear and resentment. Wrestlers watched helplessly as Michaels and the Clique decided who got pushed and who got buried. If you weren't in their group, you were a target. And Michaels was the most dangerous member of all. Brilliant in the ring, ruthless behind the curtain, and completely willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The Undertaker once said that if Shawn Michaels was on fire, he wouldn't help put it out. That's how much his own colleagues despised him. But even Undertaker admitted there was nobody he'd rather work with in the ring. That's the paradox of Shawn Michaels. Professionally invaluable, personally intolerable. The following 10 feuds represent the full scope of Michaels' backstage destruction. Some involve creative sabotage, others crossed into personal cruelty. A few nearly ended in real violence. Together, they paint a picture of a man who let power corrupt him completely. Let's count down the 10 wrestlers who truly hated Shawn Michaels and had every reason to. Number 10, the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors represented old-school wrestling values. Animal and Hawk were respected veterans who'd earned their place through years of hard work. They didn't play politics. They didn't manipulate management. They just showed up and performed. So when they watched Shawn Michaels and the Clique take over the WWF, they saw something that disgusted them: corruption at the highest level. The Road Warriors didn't hide their contempt. They openly criticized Michaels' political leverage with Vince McMahon. In one infamous quote, they said Michaels had Vince in the palm of his hands and in his backside. That kind of public criticism from established locker room leaders was significant. It validated what everyone already knew. Michaels possessed undue influence over the company's owner. This wasn't just about one faction disliking another. The Road Warriors represented a generational conflict. They came from an era where respect was earned, not demanded, where politics stayed out of the ring, where talent alone determined your position. Michaels represented everything opposite: manipulation, backstage deals, and power plays that had nothing to do with ability. When legends start calling you corrupt, you know the hatred runs deep. Michaels didn't just make enemies. He made the entire locker room question whether merit mattered anymore. Number 9, Psycho Sid. Psycho Sid represented everything the Clique feared: a powerful main eventer who didn't need their approval. Sid Yudi was massive, charismatic, and capable of carrying the championship. But he had one fatal flaw in Michaels' eyes. He wasn't part of their group. That made him a threat. That made him a target. During Michaels' championship reign in the mid-1990s, Sid competed for the top spot. He had the size Vince McMahon traditionally loved. He had the presence to headline WrestleMania. But he also had to navigate the most toxic period of Michaels' career: the Syracuse bar fight, the backstage chaos, the Clique's controlling influence over every booking decision. Every time Sid tried to establish himself as the company's top star, he ran into an invisible wall built by Michaels and his allies. This was a political turf war. Michaels saw Sid as competition for the spot he'd claimed as his own. The Clique saw Sid as an outsider who needed to be controlled, so they worked to undermine his push whenever possible. The friction between Michaels and Sid shows how paranoid the Clique really was. They didn't just fight obvious enemies. They fought anyone with main event potential who wasn't them. Sid's crime wasn't doing anything wrong. It was being good enough to threaten their grip on power. Number 8, Chris Candido. Most of Shawn Michaels' backstage heat involved politics or egos. The conflict with Chris Candido went somewhere darker, into personal betrayal and moral toxicity. Candido wasn't a main eventer. He wasn't competing with Michaels for championships or spotlight. But Michaels destroyed him anyway through the cruelest method possible. Michaels allegedly engaged in a relationship with Candido's girlfriend at the time, Tammy Sitch, known on screen as Sunny. This wasn't about wrestling. This wasn't about creative control. This was a direct invasion of a colleague's personal life. In any workplace, place, interfering with a co-worker's relationship would be unacceptable. In the tight-knit world of professional wrestling, it was considered the ultimate locker room sin. The animosity this created was intense. Candido had to watch his personal life implode while working alongside the man responsible. He had to see Michaels walk around backstage with the political protection that made confronting him impossible. He had no recourse, no way to fight back. Michaels had Vince McMahon's backing. Candido had nothing but humiliation. This incident reveals the extent of Michaels' arrogance during his peak power. He didn't just think he was untouchable professionally, he believed he could do anything without consequence. Interfering with Candido's relationship wasn't even about wanting Tammy Sitch specifically. It was about proving he could. It was about demonstrating that his power extended everywhere, even into the most personal aspects of his colleagues' lives. When wrestlers talk about why they hated Shawn Michaels, the Candido situation always comes up. It represents the moment when Michaels stopped being just a difficult co-worker and became genuinely cruel. He crossed a line most people recognize as sacred, and he did it because nobody could stop him. Number 7. Hulk Hogan. By 2005, Shawn Michaels was supposedly a changed man. He'd found faith. He'd apologized for his past behavior. He'd rebuilt his reputation as a respected performer and locker room leader. Then he stepped in the ring with Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam and proved that some things never change. Hogan was booked to win the match cleanly. Standard veteran respect booking, the older legend goes over, the younger star sells big to make him look good. But Michaels didn't see it that way. He believed an old, past his prime Hogan shouldn't decisively dominate him. He thought the booking was ridiculous, so he decided to protest. Michaels chose the most public way possible to show his displeasure. He intentionally oversold nearly every move Hogan executed. Not realistic selling, theatrical, comedic, almost mocking movement. Every punch sent him flying. Every move looked absurd. It was a deliberate display designed to expose how ridiculous he thought the match was. This incident is telling for several reasons. First, it happened years after Michaels celebrated redemption. The volatile substance-abusing 1990s Michaels was supposedly gone, but here he was, still unable to handle a booking decision he disagreed with, still willing to sabotage a match publicly, still convinced his opinion mattered more than the plan. Second, it revealed that Michaels' difficulty wasn't just about his wild 1990s persona. It was about a consistent competitive streak that bordered on arrogance. Even the reformed, faith-driven Michaels couldn't resist exposing what he saw as flawed booking. The ribbing might have been playful in his mind, but it showed the same underlying issue. Michaels believed he knew better than everyone else. The Hogan match proved that while Michaels had found personal peace, his professional competitiveness and willingness to test boundaries never fully disappeared. You can change your lifestyle. You can find faith. You can apologize for the past. But some core personality traits remain. And for Shawn Michaels, the need to be right, to be the best, to prove his point, that never went away. Number 6. Owen Hart. Not every feud involved screaming matches or physical fights. Some were quieter, more insidious. The heat between Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart represented the most damaging kind of backstage politics. Systematic career obstruction. Owen never had a public blow-up with Michaels. He didn't get into a brawl. He just watched his opportunities disappear. Owen Hart was one of the most talented performers in the WWF during the mid-1990s. He could work any style. He could make anyone look good. He had the Hart family name and credibility. By all logic, he should have been pushed to main event status, but he never got there. And the Clique's political maneuvering was a big reason why. Reports suggest Michaels and his allies used their creative control influence to railroad Owen's advancement. That term, railroad, means systematically blocking someone's career progression, not through one big incident, but through constant small acts of sabotage. A bad word to Vince McMahon here. A booking suggestion there. Quiet poison dripped slowly until it killed Owen's momentum completely. Why target Owen? Because he was Bret Hart's brother. In the Clique's factional war against the Hart family, Owen was collateral damage. He didn't have to do anything wrong. His last name made him an enemy. So Michaels and his group ensured Owen hit a glass ceiling he couldn't break through, no matter how good he was. This kind of political obstruction is worse than a public feud in some ways. At least with someone like Bret Hart, the conflict was visible. Everyone knew they hated each other. Owen's situation was different. He struggled and failed without understanding why. He couldn't point to a specific incident. He couldn't defend himself. He just slowly realized the main event would never happen for him. Owen Hart's career illustrates how the Clique didn't just hurt their direct enemies. They damaged anyone connected to those enemies. They created an organizational barrier that talent alone couldn't overcome. Michaels enabled this system. He benefited from it. And Owen paid the price. A career that should have reached the top permanently stuck one level below. Not because he lacked ability, but because he had the wrong friends and family. Number 5. Marty Jannetty. Before the Clique, before the championship runs, before the political manipulation, then, there was Marty Jannetty. Jannetty represented Shawn Michaels' first major betrayal, the moment when personal ambition trumped loyalty completely. The Rockers were a successful tag team. They could have continued for years, but Michaels wanted more. He wanted singles stardom, and he was willing to destroy his partner to get it. The famous barbershop segment showed Michaels attacking Jannetty, throwing him through a window. It was a shocking moment on television, a tag team violently splitting up. But backstage, it represented something deeper. Michaels aggressively transitioning to singles competition while leaving Jannetty behind. Real friction existed between them, rooted in Michaels' overwhelming professional ambition. After the split, Michaels became a superstar. Jannetty struggled. Reunion angles were attempted but failed to gain traction. When asked about this later, Michaels justified his actions by pointing to Jannetty's career inconsistencies. He said Jannetty would shoot himself in the foot by failing to stay with the company. Essentially, Michaels blamed Jannetty for the very problems the split created. This pattern became typical for Michaels. Betray someone, then justify it afterward by claiming they weren't good enough anyway. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Break someone's momentum, watch them struggle, then use their struggle as proof you were right to break them in the first place. The Jannetty split was the first sign of what Michaels would become. It showed his willingness to prioritize his singular trajectory above all else. It demonstrated that loyalty meant nothing compared to ambition. It proved that anyone standing between Michaels and success would be removed, regardless of history or friendship. Years later, people remember Shawn Michaels as a main eventer and Marty Jannetty as a cautionary tale. But that outcome wasn't inevitable. It was manufactured by Michaels' calculated betrayal. He didn't just leave a tag team, he ended his partner's career to boost his own. That's where the pattern started. That's when Michaels first chose himself over everyone else. Number 4, The Undertaker. The relationship between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker during the 1990s represented a unique dynamic. Personal disgust mixed with professional respect. Mark Calloway was the quiet, authoritative presence in the locker room. Cool, collected, and commanding respect through presence rather than politics. He watched Michaels' behavior with growing distaste. Undertaker openly stated that during Michaels' early years, he didn't care for him as a human being. He went further, saying if Shawn was on fire, he wouldn't help put it out. That's an extraordinary level of personal dislike. Undertaker wasn't a gossip. He wasn't dramatic. When he expressed that kind of contempt, it meant something. Michaels himself acknowledged the source of friction. He characterized his personality at the time as very outgoing, which he admitted really meant overly obnoxious. That's a polite way of saying he was insufferable, loud, arrogant, constantly demanding attention and special treatment. Everything that would annoy a quiet professional like Undertaker. But here's the paradox. Despite despising Michaels personally, Undertaker recognized his superior in-ring talent. He admitted there was nobody he'd rather work with professionally. This created an impossible situation. Undertaker wanted nothing to do with Michaels as a person, but needed him as a performer. That tension defined their relationship throughout the decade. The conflict reached its breaking point before WrestleMania 14 in 1998. Michaels was scheduled to drop the WWF Championship to Steve Austin, signaling the transition to the Attitude Era. But Michaels, dealing with a severe back injury and displaying erratic behavior, was reportedly reluctant to perform the clean title change as booked. This wasn't just about one match. It was about the company's biggest event and most important storyline. Michaels' reluctance threatened everything. The severity of the situation required intervention from the locker room's ultimate authority, The Undertaker himself. Undertaker allegedly delivered an ultimatum to Michaels backstage. The message was clear: do the job as planned or face consequences. This wasn't a request. It was an order from the one man in the company with enough moral authority and physical credibility to enforce it. Michaels complied. The match happened as booked. Austin won the title. This intervention speaks volumes about how bad things had gotten. Michaels' behavior had spiraled to the point where not even his political protection mattered. The Undertaker's ultimatum showed that eventually someone has to step in. Even the most powerful wrestler in the company had limits. Even Shawn Michaels had to answer to someone. The Undertaker-Michaels dynamic reveals why so many people hated Shawn. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't politics, it was genuine disgust at watching someone abuse power without accountability, until finally someone powerful enough forced him to stop. Number 3, the British Bulldog. The British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, was caught in the crossfire of Michaels' war against the Hart family. But this wasn't just political maneuvering or booking disputes. What happened between Michaels and the British Bulldog crossed into personal cruelty, deliberately humiliating a man in front of his home country and attacking his family for no reason except pure spite. The conflict peaked at one night-only pay-per-view in Birmingham, England in September 1997. The British Bulldog defended the WWF European Championship in the main event. He was performing in his home country, receiving overwhelming support from the crowd. Michaels, the challenger, was heavily booed and garnered massive heel heat. Michaels defeated the British Bulldog to win the championship. That alone would have been controversial, taking the title from a beloved local hero in his homeland. But Michaels didn't stop there. After the victory, he actively taunted the British crowd. He mocked their support. He turned what should have been a professional match into a deliberate insult. Then it got worse. Michaels directed clear insults toward Davey Boy Smith's wife, Diana Hart Smith, who was sitting at ringside. Diana was Bret Hart's sister. She had nothing to do with the match. She wasn't part of the storyline. Michaels targeted her anyway, taunting her publicly while she watched helplessly. This act confirmed that Michaels viewed the British Bulldog conflict as an extension of his war with Bret Hart. It wasn't about the European Championship. It wasn't even about Davey Boy Smith specifically. It was about attacking anyone connected to the Hart family. Michaels used emotional provocation as a weapon, blurring the line between kayfabe and reality to cause maximum damage. The British Bulldog incident shows Michaels at his most unnecessarily cruel. He didn't need to taunt Diana. He didn't need to insult the British crowd beyond normal heel work. He chose to escalate. He chose to make it personal. He chose to hurt people who couldn't fight back. That's not being a great heel. That's being genuinely mean. Years later, people remember that night in Birmingham as one of the clearest examples of Michaels' toxicity. He had the European Championship. He had the victory. But that wasn't enough. He needed to humiliate people. He needed to prove his power extended everywhere, even across the Atlantic, even into the personal lives of families who never asked to be part of his war. Number 2, Vader. Vader represents one of the clearest cases of Shawn Michaels using political power to sabotage someone's career. Leon White was a legitimate international star, imposing, athletic despite his size, and credible as a monster heel. When he arrived in the WWF, he was slated for a significant championship run. The plan was clear. Vader would defeat Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship at SummerSlam 1996. That title change never happened. Reports indicate Michaels used his considerable influence to veto the planned finish. He effectively killed the original booking. The resulting match at SummerSlam was a disaster. Chaotic structure, multiple awkward restarts following a countout and disqualification. Clear signs of backstage political disputes manifesting physically in the ring. Michaels' frustration was visible throughout the match. He worked stiff. He seemed irritated. The chemistry was terrible. The match concluded with Michaels retaining the title via a moonsault press. Vader, the monster who was supposed to be unstoppable, was stopped completely. The damage to Vader's credibility was severe and permanent. He arrived in the WWF as a dangerous threat. He left SummerSlam looking weak. His failure to defeat Michaels, and the manner of that failure, destroyed his momentum. He never recovered. The push that was supposed to make him the company's top heel instead became a cautionary tale about what happens when you go against Michaels. Even Jim Ross, a company insider, criticized Michaels' handling of the situation. Ross said Michaels overplayed his hand, calling his behavior very unprofessional. Then Ross added something chilling. Michaels was just lucky Vader didn't beat him up for real, because Leon White absolutely could have. That comment reveals how precarious Michaels' position really was. His political power protected him from booking consequences, but it couldn't protect him from physical retaliation if Vader decided to shoot on him. The fact that industry veterans like Jim Ross openly criticized Michaels shows how indefensible his actions were. The Vader incident is historically used to demonstrate how Michaels prioritized his control over the company's long-term needs. Vader could have been a major star. The WWF needed credible monster heels, but Michaels wouldn't allow anyone to look stronger than him, even temporarily. His ego superseded business logic. Vader's failed push shows the Clique's power at its most damaging. They didn't just protect their own positions. They actively diminished non-affiliated rivals. Michaels could have had a great match, lost the title, and won it back later. Instead, he refused to do business. He killed Vader's career to maintain his grip on the championship. That's not protecting your spot. That's abusing power. Number 1, Bret Hart. The conflict between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart represents professional wrestling's most famous and consequential backstage feud. This wasn't just heat. This was pure, unresolved hatred that escalated from professional rivalry into personal war. It nearly destroyed both men. It definitely scarred the WWF forever. Initially, the animosity was partly manufactured. The company wanted to intensify their on-screen rivalry leading up to their Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12 in 1996. The plan was to work the boys, make everyone think the heat was real to add legitimacy to the storyline. But the attempt to fake hatred soon transitioned into genuine, escalating animosity as both competitors struggled for supremacy within the WWF hierarchy. The problem was simple. Two of the best performers in the world, both believing they deserved to be on top, both unwilling to accept second place. Bret Hart represented traditional wrestling values. He was technical, professional, professional, and believed in doing business the right way. Michaels represented the Clique's political approach: manipulation, backstage deals, and leveraging power to maintain position. The rivalry crossed an irreversible line into unforgivable territory in 1997. Michaels used a live Raw segment to deliver the infamous Sunny Days promo. He referenced a rumored affair involving Bret Hart, a blatant and public disrespect to Hart's family and character. This wasn't working. This was a personal attack designed to humiliate Hart in front of millions of viewers. Bret didn't respond with words. He responded with violence. Backstage in Hartford, Connecticut, in June 1997, Hart and Michaels had a physical altercation. The brawl was intense enough that Hart reportedly pulled hair out of Michaels' head. The atmosphere was so toxic that Michaels subsequently requested his release from the WWF. He wanted to join Kevin Nash and Scott Hall in WCW's NWO. Vince McMahon denied the request, but the fact that Michaels wanted out shows how bad things had gotten. The Hartford fight should have been the end. It wasn't. The antagonism kept building toward its catastrophic peak: the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series in November 1997. Bret Hart was leaving for WCW. He was the WWF champion. The question was how to transition the title. Hart refused to lose in Canada, his home country. The solution seemed simple: have him lose somewhere else. But Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels had other plans. During the main event match in Montreal, Bret Hart was locked in his own sharpshooter submission hold by Michaels. Hart never submitted, but referee Earl Hebner called for the bell anyway, ending the match and awarding Michaels the championship. McMahon ordered it. Hebner executed it. Michaels was complicit in it. The Montreal Screwjob was professional betrayal at the highest level. Hart was leaving anyway. They could have handled it professionally. Instead, they chose humiliation. They chose to steal the championship from him on live television in his home country in front of his family. Michaels capitalized on the real-life controversy afterward. He integrated public knowledge of the double cross into his on-screen persona. He blurred work and shoot so completely that the industry couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This solidified his status as the most despised figure in wrestling. The hatred between Hart and Michaels lasted for years, 13 years. Bret refused to speak to Shawn. Shawn claimed he had to do what was best for business. Neither man would back down. The wound stayed open, painful, and unresolved. Then, in January 2010, something remarkable happened. Bret Hart returned to WWE programming for the first time since 1997. On Monday Night Raw, he shared an emotional televised segment with Shawn Michaels. They made peace. Bret later wrote that the reconciliation felt like closing a chapter that had been left painfully open for far too long. Michaels affirmed the authenticity of the moment, stating it was about two men who had carried around too much anger finally finding peace. The reconciliation was real, but it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the Montreal Screwjob. It doesn't change the years of genuine hatred. It doesn't excuse Michaels' role in the most controversial moment in wrestling history. Peace came eventually, but only after more than a decade of destruction. The Bret Hart feud sits at number one because it encompasses everything wrong with Shawn Michaels during his first run: the political manipulation, the personal cruelty, the willingness to cross any line to stay on top, the abuse of power that came from knowing he was too valuable to punish. All of it culminated in Montreal, a moment that damaged the industry's credibility and proved that Michaels would sacrifice anything, including professional integrity, to maintain his position. Bret Hart didn't just hate Shawn Michaels. He despised what Shawn represented: the selfishness, the politics, the manipulation. And he wasn't the only one. But his hatred cut the deepest because it was justified by the biggest betrayal wrestling had ever seen. The widespread animosity and chaotic backstage environment Shawn Michaels created eventually reached a breaking point. His body gave out first. The severe back injury he suffered forced him into retirement in 1998, but the physical collapse was just a symptom. The real problem was emotional and spiritual breakdown. There was also the Syracuse bar fight, where Michaels got beaten severely by multiple attackers. His erratic behavior had made enemies everywhere, inside and outside the business. The violence, the injury, the constant drama, it all became unsustainable. Michaels was forced to step away. During his time away from wrestling, something changed. Michaels later confessed that despite achieving his dream of being on top of the wrestling world, he felt isolated and miserable. His own words, "This sucks." He acknowledged that maintaining the abrasive persona required to survive the political trenches came at an intolerable personal cost. Being a rock, being untouchable, being hated, it destroyed him. Michaels found faith. He embraced Christianity. When he returned to wrestling years later, he was different. The redemption was genuine. He focused on creating special moments instead of generating conflict. He mentored younger talent. He avoided the political games. He became the respected elder statesman instead of the locker room cancer. But redemption doesn't erase history. Michaels found peace with himself, himself and with Bret Hart. He apologized. He changed. He became someone his former self wouldn't recognize. That's admirable, but it doesn't undo the careers he damaged. It doesn't fix the toxicity he created. It doesn't excuse the years of destruction. Shawn Michaels' story isn't just about greatness. It's about how power without humility can make even the best performer hated by everyone around him. From Bret Hart to the Road Warriors, from Vader to Candido, each feud left a scar. And every scar told the same story. The Heartbreak Kid broke more than just hearts. He broke trust, careers, and the locker room itself. The 10 wrestlers who hated Shawn Michaels had legitimate reasons. The animosity wasn't manufactured. The heat was real. And while Michaels eventually found redemption, the wreckage he left behind during his first run remains part of his legacy. You can't separate the artist from the damage he caused. You can only acknowledge both and understand that one of wrestling's greatest performers was also one of its most destructive personalities. If you enjoyed uncovering the darker side of wrestling history, hit like, subscribe, and tell us which Shawn Michaels feud shocked you the most.